We have a wonderful collection of automaton in the Voyage Continues, and appropriately, the first one we want to show you really is a Voyage type of theme. A wonderful town village with a painted scene in the background. The dome has its original painted scene. We know it's the original dome. It has the original paper tune label on the back side, and showing all of the village scenes with the windmill, the water tower, the people peeking out, the little children peeking out at the sides. We have the bridge at the background and the couples promenading in the evening hours, promenading across the bridge in the background. So many different activities are going on that you can see. So let's count the movements of what is going on. We have the windmill turning. We have the water wheel turning. We have the boat, which is rocking back and forth. We have the couples walking across the top. We even have a clock in the clock tower. And although I wrote in the catalog that the clock may not be working, we do now know that it is working. So that's a wonderful thing. And it has a chime, which you might have heard through the beginning part of this video because the clock kept chiming, and that's what you were hearing. This is a wonderful piece. I like it because it's so many things. This was done about 1870. And in that time period, we have the Industrial Revolution going on. People being much more interested in mechanics and how things worked. And to have all of these different movements is so important. Also, I like it because it's like we don't think of voyages in the same way that people thought of them 150 years ago. A journey was a very important thing. The ships going off to sea, these people saying goodbye to the ships going off to sea, the children waving. Life moved more slowly, and when people left and went off to sea, you may never see them again. This is a wonderful bucolic scene of a gentle French village. Jean Fallois not only created the wonderful vignettes under the domes, which I think are grand, but he also created some very gentle, simple scenes for the salon. And this is a very good example of one that he created in an early period, in about 1860. We have this wonderful papier-mâché man with his glass enamel eyes, and he is strumming his violin and then periodically tapping his foot in time to the action. In the meantime, music plays. Very beautiful piece. The singing birds became a very, very popular decorative object with mechanical action to be found in the salons, the Parisian salons of the 1870s right on through the end of the century. Bontemps was one of the most prominent makers of these, and there's wonderful stories about him that he would go out to the woods surrounding Paris and actually make notes concerning the sounds of the birds and their tweets. So when he went back, he could reconstruct them to have these actual sounds, and you realize how realistic they are. Now, perhaps you're thinking that why does this stop working? Because it was designed that way. It was like birds in the forest that would be tweeting, and then there would be a pause in their activity, and then they would begin tweeting again. This particular piece is especially notable. 4 birds. This is very, very unusual. It's usually 1, sometimes 2 birds, but to have 4 birds is quite remarkable. And they're all doing different activities. One of them is eating little pieces of food. One of them is in the nest, just flitting its wings as though it's trying to learn how to fly. The one down at the bottom is chipping away at the food in the basket in front of him. And this beautiful bluebird just seems to be trying to take control of the whole affair and turning his head around and telling people what to do. It's a gorgeous arrangement in a beautiful case. It's no wonder that singing birds have continued to be made until this day, although not in this type of arrangement. It's a lightning. singing birds were made in these wonderful cages, as we've just shown you, but they were also made in what were known as the little bird boxes, and very, very decorative cases with beautiful design on the silver work or on the gold work. In both cases, having a design of birds on the oval lid that would flip open, and when wound at the bottom and the lid flipped open, a bird would pop up, flutter around back to forth, and sing its little bird song, and then the lid would close again, and there they would be. They were so popular that, as I said, they continued to be made. Both of these by the firm of Griesbaum, who continued to make them well into the 20th century. And the silver one, in fact, coming in its own little leather case with its original instructions for use, the instructions for use in English, so clearly designed for the English market, but two beautifully preserved pieces. The waltzing theme couple was very popular, starting before Vichy, starting with Theriault, who made them in paper mache and wax, and then basically the same style continuing with the Vichy firm, who made this absolutely spectacular pair that have been perfectly preserved under their original dome all these years. You can see they work wonderfully, and the music is wonderful. They twirl around and around, and then they make this wide gliding motion across the table, which I have stopped several times in order to preserve the dolls, but they do function beautifully, and beautiful, absolutely music. A couple of things I've always loved about these dolls is, look at the modeling of her arms. She's holding it in the very proper position for performing a formal waltz at the time. The gentleman is looking at her attentively. She has her head modestly turned to the side. All of this was not, so you didn't just take a stock bisque arm from a porcelain maker. You had to have one created especially to produce this. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen how the actual mechanism attached, so I'm going to give you the opportunity of seeing that now. Very nicely is the spike, which is attached to a structure on the underside of the woman. The man is attached to the woman with a metal rod here at his midriff. And so the whole mechanical situation works together neatly. And I'm going to show you this. I'm going to gently put them down. And I'm going to show you the interior of the mechanism that you can see. When wound, the rod coming up pivots around, and that's what creates the motion. And it has the original label on the bottom, G. Vichy of Paris, the silver label. And then on the underside, we have the wheeled mechanism, the 3 wheels that make them glide across the floor. And we have the original tune label, 2 tunes, and the stop-start mechanism. So really beautifully preserved in wonderful condition. And if you're asking me what the labels are, one of them is Le Waltz, the waltz, but I can't read the rest, it's illegible. And the first one is illegible to me, although if you read French better than I did, you might be able to decipher it. A very, very beautiful piece, and luckily they have their original dome, which has kept them so fresh with original costumes all these years. So making music for the wonderful couple to waltz is this wonderful violinist on the flat cut bass, and I love the way he's posed with his knee jauntily over to one side, his head turning around looking at the crowd, and very casually, not even watching how he's strumming the violin, he clearly knows what he's doing and creates wonderful music and a wonderful atmosphere, and he just has a great presentation all the way around. A piece like this displays so beautifully with a group of French fashion dolls because he's the same body style and he has the same wonderful costumes, and you don't even have to have him playing, although isn't it great that he does? Wonderful music. that beautiful music? An automaton I haven't seen before. Very, very different. Little girl is sitting on this paper mache base which contains the mechanism, and at her feet is a basket of the fish that she's caught for the day. And she holds a metal, fishing net with the tin fish in her hands and turns her head from side to side as though she's looking for customers who will purchase her fresh fish here, fresh fish here. And then the lid lifts so the people can choose the fish they want. Very rare. I've never seen this automaton before, and I've looked through all of the old manufacturer's catalogs, and I do not see it listed there. Very, very definitely Vichy, of course. Has their original stop-start lever. And it goes to a different tune. Tapping her foot, and then the lid opens. And then her foot comes up again and the lid closes. If there was ever an automaton that spoke Vive la France, this would be it. Wearing the French national colors, wearing her bicorn hat with a feather, and her wonderful drum, which once again has the red, white, and blue colors. This beautiful Bébé Jumeau is standing on her original velvet-covered base behind her large drum. Music plays, and she beats the cymbals and turns her head from side to side. Certainly a great celebration, probably created for like the 1889 International Exposition, celebrating France. So earlier in the century, perhaps about 10 years earlier, Vichy had made a grand piece called The Peasant and the Pig, where this peasant is feeding his pig. Later on, Roulet and Decamps did their version of the same thing, only we no longer really have a peasant. I mean, he's said to be a peasant, but he certainly is a gentleman with his red silk jacket, trousers, his original costume, little wooden shoes, carrying his little wooden glass bottle with the wooden nipple, and carrying his papier-mâché pig. And let's watch what happens, because this pig is definitely not just any pig. He is his pet. Watch the pig's ears. He turns his head back and forth, and then he vigorously feeds the bottle to the little piglet, and every time he does, the pig flaps his ears up and down, absolutely delighted to be cherished so deeply. Probably the only pig in the world that was being carried under an arm and fed with a bottle. Unless you watched the new episodes of the Gilmore Girls. Very happy song, too. Here's a wonderful automaton that, well, you know, I know automatons were fancy and imaginative, but I really don't know why a fellow garbed up in this beautiful silk costume and top hat and just ready to go to the ball is carrying a beehive around, but that's what he's doing. He's carrying a beehive, and watch what happens. Beehive closes. Tap, tap. Beehive opens, and what's in the beehive? Not bees, but a little mouse who's showing you a little treasure he's holding. Such imaginative things going on. The attention getting of the tapping of the cane is absolutely wonderful, and the movements are perfectly synchronized to happen one right after another. The gentleman's movements of his head are very convoluted, not just turning back and forth, but he's like rolling in circles with his head. And I'm going to turn it around so you can see his costuming all the way around. The hat in particular is absolutely fabulous. What is that mouse doing in a beehive? I just don't get it. But such is the joy of fantasy. You don't have to get it. You just have to be amused and delighted by it. Tap perfectly. As the century wore on, the automaton makers realized that they had a wonderful potential market among people who were buying the beautiful bébés that they offered. And they started to create wonderful designs, such as this one, the lady at her dressing table. Very, very beautifully done with a wonderful bisque head, gorgeous ivory satin costume, original costume, and standing at the lace-covered dressing table, which is laden with wonderful porcelain accessories and soap and perfume bottles and perfume puffs. And when you finished admiring the presentation, listen to the music and watch the motion. She gazes in the mirror as she lifts her hand. Then she turns her head and decides she needs a little more powder on her face. And she powders her face. And then, when she's finished with that, she lifts the mirror and gazes again until she has it absolutely perfectly done. In the meantime, this beautiful music is playing. It's a gorgeous presentation, and understandably was a very, very desirable and popular one, albeit extremely luxurious. Falling in with the category again of having beautiful dolls that to appeal to the market of people buying lovely bébés, we have this wonderful example, a very beautiful face, and she performs wonderful yet simple activities. You think. She withdraws her hand from her muff, she turns her head from side to side, she nods, and she does, watch for it, breathes. Her torso heaves open and closed, her upper torso, as she's breathing. It's like she's delighted at what she's seen, and she's very excited, and she's now breathing. Throwing the kisses. Beautiful music is playing. The breathing is really beautifully enunciated on this. Some of them it's almost imperceptible, but on her it's really very pronounced. So we've had so far a man with a pig, a gentleman with a pig. We've had another gentleman with a beehive in which lives a mouse. And now we have, you can see the love for animals that permeated French culture at the time. And their wonderful, amusing vision of the inner life of pets, as the popular movie is today. And here is another great example. This is a late automaton. It's like 1910, but it is done with a clown. And the clown is teaching his pet dog some lessons. We're not sure what, although the accompanying blackboard has the ABCs on it, and he has a little dog book about a French dog in the front. So let's watch this and have a good time. Check out the dog. Paws and tail. I loved when the Vichy firm was taken over by Triboulet, and they continued the idea of the wonderful papier-mâché figures that Vichy had made originally, but then moved into making things that were very contemporary with Paris culture at the time. Now, anyone who's ever been to Paris, even today, loves the kiosks that are all throughout Paris, the Parisian Kiosk, selling newspapers and novelties and little trinkets. Vichy Triboulet created this automaton with the notion of being an attention getter. It would be in a store window or that vitrine, and it would capture people to come and look at it, and I'm sure they did for hours, because there's so many things to study on this piece that you could look at it for hours. So our fellow is standing there, and we'll start with him. He has this wonderfully painted face, actually very beautiful sculpture. He has his original wig with his wonderful hair coming out, wearing a great original costume with little running piglets all across the top of it. And then look what he's doing. He's standing at the rung of his ladder. He's standing, he's balancing on the rung of the ladder with his two hands, showing how strong his arms are. He's nodding to you, nodding away, and then showing the strength of his arms, he goes up, and then he lifts arms up, and he balances on one hand only, and he goes up and down about 3 times doing that, and then comes back down and repeats. Meanwhile, at his side is the wonderful Parisian Kiosk, and I've stood for hours and read the different posters on here, and they're absolutely wonderful. My favorite, I think, is the Cabinet Dentaire, which is the painless dentistry, but I've got to tell you, the guy sitting in the chair doesn't look like it's very painless. There's wonderful things like the children's breakfast. There's a fabrique de fauteuil, like a woman in a wicker chair with wheels that's being wheeled around. It's a very luxury thing. There's toys and games of France. There's a little advertisement for that. There's circus, and there's wonderful things. Now, sitting in the front store window of the kiosk is the clerk who's ready to take your money after you have purchased either the tickets to any of these great events or one of the wonderful treasures that would be on the inside. And when it comes around, as it revolves around, you're going to see the door open, and you're going to see an absolute treasure trove of wonderful not early, but of the time period, early 1900s, novelties, toys, and treasures that children would have played with, or little novelties from letters to books to a little pocket watch to, I'm seeing so many treasures in there. You could look at it for hours after you finish looking at the posters. A great, wonderfully preserved piece, a very beautiful piece.